The War of Caernarvon Crescent.
A long time had passed without incident. I occasionally noticed the fat fucker crone spawn walking past my house here and there, and nothing was ever said. There's no menacing vibe. There's no dodgy look from both the fat fucker and Quasimodo Beaton's stepsister. Days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months. Not even when it was time for the fat fucker to up and leave back to the other side of the world was there any reprisal. There was never another complaint from the crone. I think in all honesty that her defeated son had just told her not to carry this on. I even found time to take my family on holiday to the Caribbean. We had a nice stress-free holiday in which we didn't even worry about what would happen to our house or cars. Agamemnon had his holiday at a farm with kennels. I was told via email that he enjoyed running around the open fields as dogs do. He even managed to get a shag from a spayed Doberman bitch, and there was no argument about a hefty vet bill or complaint from the bitch's owner, as the kennels manager decided it was in everyone's interest not to inform them. We flew back to the country without a care in the world and feeling refreshed. Ellie's parents picked us up from the airport and took us back to our house. Even though we were told that nothing had happened by Ellie's parents, and that I would routinely dial into the security system by remote when I was on a Wi-Fi network, I still couldn't help myself look at the cars for damage, as well as the outside of the house. I did notice a strange whiff in the air, but I assumed it was from the bins that were exposed to the hot sun during the summer heat wave while we were away. Once we got through the door, Ellie put the kettle on, and I went and unloaded Ellie's parents' car. Within 5 minutes, our entire luggage was inside the hallway, and even with the front door closed, I could still smell this strong, repugnant odour. I decided to go around the house and open all the windows to air the place out, but the odour was getting stronger. Now this was puzzling me. I went into the kitchen, opened the back door, and the smell hit me like Mike Tyson hitting a child in the face. I knew I smelt that smell before, but I just couldn't place it. I was sure at some point it would come back to me, but my mind was total blank. I closed the back door and went into the cupboard under the sink and pulled out a tin of air freshener. I walked around the house, downsizing the entire canister everywhere I could, but the smell was still there. I went out to the back garden and I had a sniff from the drains, but the smell wasn't coming from there. I scratched my head and began walking towards the back of the garden, and the smell was getting less and less. So if it wasn't coming from the house or the back of the garden, where the fuck was it coming from? I looked back towards the house and noticed that the crone had her window slightly opened. There was a flurry of activity from a swarm of flies. They were buzzing around in great numbers, going in and out of the open window. That's when the reminder of the smell hit me. Years ago, when I was working on a sound equipment hire warehouse, we had a similar smell coming from the back of a vending machine. After a few days in the middle of summer, the smell became too much to bear, so I came along with the forklift truck and picked up the vending machine like it was a baby and placed it down 5 meters forward of its original position. Laying against the wall was a massive dead and decaying rat. That was it. The smell that was lingering around my house and garden was a smell of death. And with that horde of flies, I came to the conclusion that the crone had croaked it. I went back into the house and told everyone of my suspicion. My wife Ellie insisted that I go and knock on people's doors to see when the last time the crone was seen. I went outside and began knocking on the neighbour's house on the other side of the crone. Bob came out and he was wincing with the smell. "I take it you can smell that too," I said to Bob. "Yeah," he said, "it's been getting worse over the last few weeks. We just assumed it was the bins." "That's what I thought," I said to Bob. "Can I ask when the last time you saw her?" I pointed my thumb towards the crone's house. "Now I think of it," said Bob, I've not actually seen her about in 3 weeks. "You don't think?" I cut over Bob. "I think she's dead, mate. I'm going to send Ellie and Aurora away to pick up Agamemnon with her parents whilst I investigate." "Give me a knock when you do," said Bob. "Yeah, I will do." I walked off back to my house. Once I got in, I asked Ellie and her parents to pick up the dog to keep away for quite a few hours. I just knew that it wasn't going to be a pretty sight. Once everyone had left, I went over to my laptop that controlled the security system. I recalled the date on the program to the day before we set off our holiday, which was the last time I saw the crone. I came across the image of me running the luggage out to Ellie's parents' car, and the crone had crossed my path. That was my point of reference. I then hit the fast play button and cranked it up to 32 times speed. Day went to night and night went to day. I recorded the crane 2 more times. The first was her leaving the house 4 hours after we had left to go on holiday. 6 hours later when she returned home. She was never recorded again on the security feed after this. I opened up the audio track line to see if there were any random noises that spiked up. There are a few big spikes about 18 hours after the crane was last seen, and a few smaller spikes of sound at random intervals for the next 12 hours. I brought the laptop into the living room and turned the television on. Within a few seconds I had transferred the laptop's image to the big screen and cranked up the volume in full. I loaded a section of the recording with the first big spike and hit play from a minute before the spike of sound. Very faintly I could hear a thud. I played it back a few times to make sure I didn't mishear, and it was indeed the sound of something or someone falling down. The next few spikes sounded like banging on the wall. Once again it was quite faint. The quietness was from the microphone being linked to the outside cameras. It was hard to tell, but you could just about able to make out the banging, and then I heard it. I wound the recording back a few times and even slowed it down a little. I could make out the faint recording of the word help. That was it. The crane was definitely dead. I hit pause again. I hit pause and began to copy the file to a hard drive. I left my house and gave Bob a knock. "What do you think?" said Bob as he answered the front door. "I think she's dead, Bob," I said. "I even checked my cameras and I recorded a cry for help." Bob paused and scratched his head. "My fence is lower than yours," said Bob. "I think she tends to leave her back door unlocked when she's in her house. Let's jump over and take a look." I agreed and followed Bob to his back door, went to his garden and jumped the waist-high garden fence. Neither of us wanted to try and open the door, but eventually I pinched my nose and pulled the handle down. The door flung open and we went inside. The smell was absolutely horrific. Even with my nose pinched, I could still taste the vile smell. I could hear the buzzing of massive amount of flies in the next room, and lifted the bottom of my t-shirt and placed it over my mouth and nose. Bob copied me. Bob was probably expecting what I was. As soon as that door opens up, we would probably be hit in the face with a major dose of death. I fumbled with the door handle and eventually pulled it down. The door opened towards me, and I was right. The smell did indeed smack me in the face. It was that strong, even with my t-shirt over my mouth and nose. Even with me pinching my nose, the smell was still going up it. On the floor was the crane face down, and she was resting on some cheap laminate flooring. The crane's skin was undulating and pulsating with various wriggling movements. Flies were buzzing around it like there was no one's business, and I could see maggots wriggling out from holes in their skin and falling into the floor. Not only had the crane cracked it, but her dying moments fouled herself. There was a massive piss stain on the cream-coloured carpet surrounding the crane's corpse, and that stain was also full of festering flies and maggots. She had probably shit herself as well, but I really didn't want to investigate that at all. I managed to control my vomiting, and fortunately, so did Bob. We both left the house and went into the back garden, closing every door behind us. I pulled out a cigarette and sparked it up. Both Bob and I remained silent. We were deep in thought about what to do next. By the time I had half smoked my cigarette, I pulled out my phone and dialed 999. The operator answered promptly, and I explained the situation, and that there was no rush needed, as there's absolutely no chance of reviving the decaying crane. Both Bob and I walked back into the house and found our way to the front door so we could unlock it and wait outside for the police and an ambulance crew to recover the crane's rotting carcass. I sat down on the doorstep and Bob did the same. I pulled out another cigarette and lit it. After a few moments, Bob looked me in the eyes and said, "You know," he paused with a deep sigh, "what she did to your family, she did the same to mine." I looked at Bob and nodded my head. I had a feeling that she would have done that. I took a deep drag on my cigarette before continuing. "What did you do to stop her?" Bob had a slight chuckle. "Nothing." He paused and began to laugh. "You moved in and she turned her focus onto you." I laughed back. "You cunt." I carried on laughing. "How many years did she piss you off for?" Bob laughed even more. 6 years. He began to laugh even harder. 6 long stressful years. "That's unlucky," I said, still laughing. "Did you get to have a fight with her fat cunt son?" Bob coughed on his laughter. "No. When he picked a fight with you, that was the second time in 6 years he came to visit. I'm surprised you let him off lightly. I was expecting you to go to town on him." "I wanted to," I said. "It just didn't seem like a fair fight to me. I've seen snails move faster than that fat fuck." Both Bob and I burst out laughing so hard and loud. One of the crane's allies from across the road looked out of the window at us. "What are you doing there?" she snapped at us through the window. I shouted back, "I'm just guarding her until she gets picked up." Both Bob and I began to laugh once more. It was a minute later that the crane's friend, well, if you could call her a friend, it was more of a lonely old lady alliance, she came across the road. "What are you doing there, and where is she?" demanded the old woman. "I told you already," I said. "I'm guarding her until she gets picked up by the police." This allied crone had a scowl on her chops when she came out with, "What's happened now for you to have her arrested again?" I lit another cigarette and said, "She's not being arrested. Well, they can try, but I don't think they would get much sense out of her if they interviewed her." "And what do you mean by that?" snapped the allied crone. I looked at the allied crone and flicked my fag over the garden wall onto the green. "Why don't you go and ask her? She's just through there in the back room," I said. The allied crone looked confused but went inside regardless. Less than a minute went by when the allied crone ran back outside and promptly threw up over the nearest shrub. In between attacked a chunder, forcing its way up the allied crone's gullet. She just about managed to say, Why didn't you warn me?" Without a second thought, and what appeared to be a second nature, I just came out with, "You didn't ask." Anyways, I'm surprised you didn't notice she was dead before. She's been dead for close to a month, or were you not actually that close? The allied crane said nothing for a while. "I was too busy," she said. "Get this, Bob. These two regarded each other as friends and probably traded stories about what mean things they got up to, and she didn't notice that her fellow nagger was missing for all this time." The allied crane said nothing and promptly left. I think that between the vomiting and witnessing the demise of the king crane, she wasn't in the mood for a situation like this. I turned and looked back at Bob. "So what did the crane do to your family then?" "What didn't she do would be the better question to ask," said Bob. Let me see. So my kids decided to do something naughty once, and I lost my temper." "As you do," I cut in with. "As you do," said Bob, "and she called social services on us. We were under investigation for 2 years, no evidence but on her say-so." I lit a cigarette. "What a fucking bitch." "Indeed," said Bob. "She was constantly complaining about the kids banging around upstairs when they were playing, and as you found out, you couldn't play music because she would bang on your door and bitch at you till you stopped it. That was a nice touch on how you retaliated." I smiled. "I know, bitch got put right in her place." "1 year," said Bob. "While we were having our Christmas dinner, she began to bang on the door." "On Christmas Day?" I said. "Yeah," said Bob. "While having Christmas dinner, she told us to keep it down because we were disturbing her." "Jesus," I said. "I know," exclaimed Bob. "She had my car towed once because it was parked in the green." "That fucking green," I said. "It was always about that fucking green." "It's not just the green," Bob said. "Not only did she take ownership of the green, but on the pavement too. She once called the police on my kids for drawing on the slabs with chalk and claiming they graffitied it." I looked at Bob. "And where did it get her? Falling over and crying for help that never came, and being ravaged by flies and maggots, whilst the two of us were trading stories of her bullshit." "Bitch is gone now, and I just hope that her family gets denied an open coffin because she's been eaten away in the face. Well, if anyone turns up, I got a funny feeling that Eleanor Rigby was more popular." The ambulance pulled up along with the police, and both Bob and I handed the situation over to them. Both Bob and I went into our respective houses. Once I was in my house, I went over to the pantry and reached up to the top shelf. I pulled down a bottle of rum and crossed the kitchen to the glass cupboard. I pulled out a shot glass. I poured out a shot and necked it in one. I poured another shot and held it in my hand. Whilst I was in deep thought. The war of Caernarvon Crescent was over, but it was a bittersweet victory. I felt cheated out of a real victory. I never had the chance for things to fully settle down. I never had the next wave of beef that I was expecting the day that Aurora was old enough to have friends over, playing music for the Wicked Witch of South Wales to start her new campaign of hatred. I never had the chance to relish that Aurora would most likely tell the crone to fuck right off when John Merrick's secret rape child attempted to tell Aurora off. Aurora would never have the experience of having Hagerford Hexpert's gate crash a house party whilst Ellie and I were away from the weekend. As much stress as the vile one would send my way, I did enjoy it in a way of getting even with the crane. I sank my shot of rum and just hoped that the next occupants of that garishly outdated looking interior of a shithole house were not going to be a set of vile, vindictive, obtuse, melodramatic arseholes like that decaying, maggot-infested cunt Barbara.
Thank you for listening to the War of Caernarvon Crescent. If you've enjoyed this production from SFX Media, why not check out more content by clicking the link in the description below. Until next time, soldier.